Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Let's please stand for the flag salute. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence.
Take a moment to remember the 4 firefighters and 9 police officers that have died since our last board meeting.
Thank you. Okay, we've got quite a meeting slated for this evening, and based on some of the presentations, I'm going to move out of order, if I may, for in reading a proclamation for our dispatchers from Cottonwood. So with that said, if I can have our 2 dispatchers kind of stand up right here. For those of you that are not aware, we are celebrating Telecommunicators Week this week. So with that said, the Sedona Fire District has created a proclamation, and I will read it to you. And it's entitled the National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, April 14th through the 20th, 2019, a week of recognition and gratitude. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require fire or emergency medical services, and whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of firefighters and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas the safety of our firefighters and paramedics is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the Cottonwood Public Safety Communications Center, known as the CPSCC, and whereas public safety telecommunicators are the first and most critical contact our citizens have with emergency services, and whereas public safety telecommunicators are the single, did I just read that? No, the single vital link for our firefighters by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them information, and ensuring their safety. And whereas public safety telecommunicators of the CPSCC have contributed substantially to the suppression of fires and treatment of patients, and whereas each dispatcher has exhibited compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year. Therefore, be it resolved that the Sedona Fire District Governing Board declares the week of April 14th through the 20th, 2019, to be the National Telecommunicators Week in Sedona, by officially recognizing and appreciating these public safety telecommunication professionals. In witness hereof, we hereunto set our hands the 16th day of April in the year 2019, signed by every board member before you. Thank you very much for the job you guys do. All righty. Thank you. Yeah. And as you come up, please introduce yourselves to the rest of the group. Come on up.
Thanks for what you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this is for you. And the office. Thank you, Emma. Thank you. All right.
Hi, Mal.
Thank you.
Yes.
And
I'm
Marie and Emily.
I've been to your center, and I am overwhelmed by the
Chief.
sophistication of your operation. Thank
Just
you.
have him introduce himself for the record. Marie, could you please introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do? And we'll have Emily do the same thing.
It was a pleasure meeting you all, and thank you very much for this proclamation. My name is Marie Carpenter. I'm the communications manager at the Cottonwood Public Safety Communications Center, and I'm joined by one of our comm supervisors, Emily Reed, in her scrubs as she's off to clinicals following this. She's graduating from nursing school this May. Quite an accomplishment while working as a full-time supervisor, and full-time in our center is full-time and then some. We've been dispatching for Sedona Fire District since about 2015, and it's been one of the more rewarding and challenging events in my career. And I thank you all for your support and for including us and for this proclamation. And it's just been a really exciting chapter, and can't wait to see what the future holds for us. Okay.
I'm Emily, and I usually don't talk in front of people, so
thanks for thanks for this proclamation. I came last year, and I think it's great that you guys do this for us.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So would you mind if the board members and the dispatcher, we took a picture against the wall?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Let's go ahead and take about a 5-minute recess for photos, and then we'll reconvene.
Maybe we'll do something like this.
I feel like karaoke's in order because I just knock it off.
I won't mess up the order anymore.
It's gonna be Jimmy Buffett.
It's a challenging process, this smiling thing. Well, you've seen this now?
Reading that thing.
Well, you did just fine.
I thought I read the same thing twice.
That's okay.
But I
It's
didn't.
very important.
But I didn't.
Rick did a good job. Oh, good. He said he spent some time out there with you, got you all lined out. He did a good job.
Oh, wrong one.
Here we go.
That's nice. It's awesome that she's going to be a nurse in a minute. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to get my nursing license next year.
Before we're all in line with it, we don't have to do that, let's talk back here and then everybody's up and do this little cop.
Gives you more, a little more to come back. Gives you more room to walk back.
Okay.
Good idea.
Okay, let's get back on track here. First up on the agenda is our budget workshop. And I believe, Gabe, you've got that, the workshop portion?
I do.
Okay, well then let's move with it.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board members, some exciting updates to give you on the budget and kind of let you know where we're at and what we've got coming up over the next 30 days, because it'll be kind of the crunch time on the budget, so we get ahead of adoption next month. So starting off today, we're going to go over really just the budget process, where we're at on the schedule of events on the budget, updates on some of our 2019-2020 expenses. We have met with all the program managers. I take that back. We've not met with the program managers, but all the program managers have submitted their requests. And so some of the numbers I'm going to show you tonight are inclusive of all of those requests. We'll talk about fund balance allocation and a bit of continued discussion on our capital fund, our end leave liability fund that we wanted to focus on this year, as well as just that general unrestricted fund balance. And then we'll give you the preliminary projections on what we're looking at, and these are kind of the unscrubbed numbers. This is, you know, taking everybody's requests and building them in. And then in that will also be kind of the overview of the budget projections.
Okay.
All right. So starting off with kind of the budget process. I can't remember if it was right before we had the board workshop or right after. I believe it was probably right after we met with the chief had me come and meet with all the program managers and really kind of discuss and talk them through not only the budget process, but how the finance process works at Sedona Fire today. And really get that understanding of when you sit down and build your budget request, we want you to build your budget request based on what your needs are to run your division or run your program through the next fiscal year. And as well as what are those capital needs of that division or that program through the next fiscal year? And then do you have any large anticipated changes coming in the year after? Because as you remember, by statute, we're required to project out a 2-year budget. And one of the things we wanted them to really understand is we don't want you to budget for every unknown that you could possibly think of and have all these contingencies built into these budgets. We want you to build your budget to run your program and understand there's mechanism in place, there's funds available for when things come up that weren't planned on and weren't projected, that we can come to our board and ask our board that this is something that wasn't anticipated and it's a need of the district today, and there are funds available for the board to access. There even is the ability within the already approved budget for management to have some certain authority to make some decisions on projects and move things around. And when you get to see the numbers, you'll see that I think that message was understood and clear, because we have everything loaded in as far as what everybody's requests were from a program standpoint, and we're seeing a very small percentage overall increase in expenses, and I was happy to see that. So
Gabe, the question I have is, so with that statement, in attempting to allow the staff to understand the fact that there isn't a need to overinflate your requests, because we have built-in safeguards, if you will, in case something does go sideways, that we can fund those items. So we got more of a true, more accurate picture of what the needs were.
yeah, exactly. I'd say that's a perfect way to say it. We have a more true picture of what the actual ongoing or operational needs are of those programs.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Do we have a standard contingency budget? Oh, I found it. Thank you. Okay. Do we have a contingency budget, like sole and separate from every other item?
So we don't have a line item, so to speak, of contingency,
Okay.
but we do have about I think it's 4.8, we'll see the exact number here in the later slide, about 4.8 million in unrestricted, or I'm sorry, between restricted and unrestricted fund balance that is our contingency. So instead of levying tax dollars from the taxpayers for basically, say, expenses we don't know what's gonna happen,
Right.
we've just built up that savings so we have that money available.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, Gabe hit the nail on the head about explaining the why to everyone, because over the 20 years that I've been here, there was a time when if you managed a certain budget that you needed to make sure and plan for whatever contingencies may occur within that budget, and you were kind of graded on how well you did that. So that then made people want to hoard a little bit and wait to put projects in it, and it made it harder to be efficient. And so in that meeting, we sat down in front of with all the different people that have budgetary responsibility and just explained to them the process, and then asked them to provide an accurate assessment of what their needs are going to be in the next coming years. Just that conversation and I think increasing that level of trust as to what was expected from them and what wasn't expected from them. It really helped us to become more effective at the process of budgeting responsibly. So it seems like so far that it's been a win.
Yep, thank you, Chief. So just a quick update on where we're at on the schedule. Today is April 16th, so we are at the budget workshop with the fire board. That's you guys. The top part there, so we'll continue, Chief and I, now that Chief's back, we're gonna continue to meet with the vendors, we're gonna continue with program managers, and really kind of finalize and fine tune those requests. One thing that's taken a little bit more time this year, but again, in meeting the level of transparency that we're at, and can't think of the word, but so we're asking program managers to kind of go out there and really cut out that contingency and give us what they need. One thing we're gonna do is give them a report both now and then at the end to show them here's your budget requests as they are, just to confirm that we have everything that you have requested in there. And then before we finalize the budget to bring to you for tentative adoption, we'll have that same report to them look through. Okay, maybe we changed this, Chief and I discussed and we had to do this. But either way, have that feedback and that communication with the program managers, because that was one of the feedbacks that we got from them was, hey, we put these requests out there and then it goes somewhere, and then next year I'm in the middle of the fiscal year and I go to buy something that I planned on and I don't have the money there. So that is kind of adding some time into that process, but again, they're kind of trusting us a little bit, and so we need to give them, what they've asked for on their end.
And there's, I think, Gabe, if you could just quickly too, as we've changed to QuickBooks and we're working to align these different budget numbers, there's also a need to have a feedback loop there to make sure that we did that right, because there's an opportunities there for things to get missed as we move across. And so that will give those people that have that operational control over that budget a chance to look at it again to make sure that we captured everything correctly.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
So in regards to QuickBooks, do we have, is there, because I know that when I use QuickBooks for my business, there's ways to kind of fudge numbers and so forth. You know, sorry. I don't do it, but I'm just saying. So I was wondering, is there some kind of like a check and balance type of a situation for ours
Yeah,
in our
so-
QuickBooks?
Yeah, so with our QuickBooks, there's a few different things. One, access is restricted, to
Right.
only personnel that need it. Some personnel have access that's read-only, so there is no ability to fudge any numbers. And then the people that do have access are only given access to areas within the system they need. And then another part of our month-end checklist is to actually review the audit trail within QuickBooks and verify if there were any transaction changes and did they make sense or did
Okay.
they not make sense, so.
And then, so we know when those transaction changes have occurred?
Yes.
When someone logs in and so forth? Okay.
So there is, yep.
Okay, cool.
Good.
Thank you.
So then next month we'll come to the May 21st board meeting. Ahead of that meeting, you guys will get your entire board budget book with all the detail and everything in it. We'll go through that at a more detailed level, going through each section, allowing the board to ask questions on all the items within that budget. We'll ask at the end of that budget workshop for the board to tentatively adopt the budget. We'll post for our minimum 20-day requirement, and then come on June 18th and have the public hearing on the budget for final adoption.
Yes, and would it be possible to have that at least a week in advance of our board meeting?
Yes.
The budget booklet?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Moving along. There we go. So kind of some overview on expenses. So wages, overall, our wages increased about 3.32%. And that increase was due to the COLA of a COLA of 2.8% and a step increase for all eligible employees. And so with one thing I will talk about on the personnel side, with us in a chief transition point, speaking with Chief Coyle and Heidi, we've kind of all agreed that right now any personnel changes need to go through the new chief. And so we are keeping a status quo from a personnel standpoint budget and allowing the new chief, when they come in, to make the determination on the organizational structure going forward.
More like a freeze.
Yeah, there's two positions, one for telecommunications and one a vacant position in admin that are still on the books. And outside of that, we didn't want to add anything else to the books just because it has such a long-term impact on the budget. That we wanted to make sure that it aligns with the new chief's goal and direction, especially since there's going to be areas where there's competing needs, and to make sure that we prioritize those in a way that consistent with their wishes.
And Chief Coyle, what was that second one? I heard the IT, but what was the
There's one administrative position that's still vacant.
Great, so you're still reaching out for applicants for that?
So what we're doing on both of them is that through the human resources, through Kiona primarily, is working with the the Mountain States employer to do an HR audit, and then we've developed a path to follow basically the same process that we did with the fire chief's position, and go down through those different ranks to assess what the work being done is and where those gaps exist. And then ideally, by the time the new chief comes on board, we'll be able to say, hey, you know what, right now, with updated job descriptions on these positions in administration, here's the work that's not being done. Here's work that's being done by somebody that would be better off working somewhere else. And so if we had a person that had this skill set in this position, then it would, specifically, frankly, Heidi ends up picking up a lot of slack. They'll allow Heidi to do some of the other stuff that I would like to see her be able to do that she can't right now, because we have her doing things that we should have somebody else doing.
Well, I'm very in favor of that job and the process you're going through, which is a good process. But I am concerned about waiting until not only the new chief gets here, but it's not likely that new chief will do something right away, just given what happens when a new person takes over a very large job. They're not likely to hire a person that month, and I'm just concerned that this burden that some staff are very graciously doing of working harder than perhaps is right. I just would hate to have that wait so long as into next year.
And I agree with you, Corey. And I have, while I don't think that we would have it all done based on the timeline that Keona and I discussed before we had the new person on board, we would have, if we get it all done before then, because it's still consistent with the plan that was in place prior to me being here, so it's not like I'm creating anything new, then we can continue to move forward with that process. And since it is a vacancy that's on the org chart, it wouldn't require me to go to the board to do that, but I would make sure and keep you all aware, of course, as we're moving forward. I just wanted to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we hired for that position, so we didn't rush things and then end up not necessarily hiring for the right skill set, if you will.
Correct, which is
But I certainly will not delay it, and I see Heidi smiling, and I'm sure she'd
Yeah.
appreciate that we don't do that,
Yeah.
delay that as well.
because this has been an ongoing situation for a while.
Yes, ma'am, it has.
Yeah.
That's
So-
correct.
So, at least my voice is that once you have the data you need and the information you need to know what kind of a job post to post, that I would hope you would do it whether or not the new chief is here yet.
Understood, and that makes good sense.
Thank you.
Gabe, one quick question for you as far as it relates to the COLA and the step increase. You said you referred to those who are eligible for both. So we have some members who are eligible for the COLA, but not entitled to a step.
And what I mean by that is we have individuals that are already at the highest step
Right.
within their position. So therefore, there's no step for them to go, but then they would receive the COLA.
Gotcha.
And those newer individuals or the individuals that are in new positions that are still eligible to have a step, would step on their anniversary, but get the COLA come July 1.
And all that's factored in.
Correct. That was where we were actually getting a lot of extra money over the previous years, was within the wage scale.
Right.
So we've cut that out by actually having, when we developed the shell last year on the employee side, that's all we focused on last year was the employee shell. We created that capability of being able to calculate steps in the month of the budget year that they were earned, not a blanket at the first half of the year. And that was about $500,000 savings in the overall budget process.
Okay, great.
Overall, I mean, this has been a great year budget-wise. Our benefit costs are only increasing 3% overall. The only caveat to that is we don't have our workers' comp rate in. We actually finalized the wage numbers today to be able to send that off to our workers' comp for a quote. Although we did have our overall base wages go up 3%, our EMOD, which is the factor that our workers' comp is calculated on, actually went down. So I do have a placeholder in there of about a 3% increase in workers' comp, but I actually do anticipate seeing that come in lower. So, and then the only other thing on benefits is health insurance. We did get our quote back and our benefit increase back. We're going up 5% on our health, on our medical, and a 6% decrease on dental.
Oh.
We don't have the census numbers in, so again, as a placeholder until I get those census numbers in, I would just have a 5% increase in our healthcare costs. So, because obviously our dental is not a very big number
Right.
of our health insurance. Any questions on the personnel side? I'm even happy to say our PSPRS was actually down. There was a decrease in
Yeah,
PSPRS expense this year. So,
That's a
we'll
first.
take it when we can get it.
Is that unique to us, or is that statewide?
No, we had a few clients actually have PSPRS go down. And then the ones that went up a very small percentage. So, yeah, it's been a good year. Going on to operational expenses, I've kind of grouped them in major categories and just some high-level highlights, because again, Chief and I have not sat down to go over the budget request together. Right now, we just have everybody's requests in there. So, buildings and land, an increase of about 3% for utility costs, and of that, actually, I haven't even met with the program manager on the basis of that. So, that's actually a number that we came up with. I need to sit down and work with the program manager on. Vehicles and equipment, an increase of about 7.5%. And that's related to really upstarting and funding some more of our special ops programs. And then believe it or not, our copier lease is much more expensive now going forward than it has been in the past. So operating leases and basically equipment for our special operations program.
Just a quick question. So when was the last time we did a cost analysis on purchasing one as opposed to continuing to lease?
So we have, to my knowledge, I don't know when we have ever done one. So I have not been involved in one here. So
Have you seen that in other
No, we've
agencies?
compared different vendors for different lease options, but never to actually own the copiers outright, I don't
right,
believe.
and typically when we do the leases, anytime the district does a lease, it's a dollar buyout. So we are essentially already buying it and just paying for it over
Right.
time. A lot of times, what I have seen, and I have no idea what the exact numbers are, but we have seen their service
Right.
contracts being higher
Right.
if you buy it outright versus do the lease with them.
Right, okay.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
why, I don't know, but
Yeah.
but we've not put pen to paper and done anything formal on that. Communications and IT, decrease of about 2%. Training and travel, decrease of 3.5%, and managerial costs, a decrease of 0.5%. So overall, our total budget increase was 1.59%, which is $280,000
From last year's budget.
from last year's budget. Yeah.
Yes, that's incredible.
Yes.
And given, that's really incredible, and given that, valuation of homes went up somewhere in the vicinity of 3+%,
Right.
does that mean we can lower the multiplier?
So I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, let me add one more, let me add an asterisk by those numbers real quick, because
Yeah.
so, tomorrow I'll be meeting with LEA to continue to work on finding out where those numbers are and stuff, like what work's already been done for Station 4 and move forward for the planning and everything for Station 4, Station 5. So there's a number there, and then for some other ways to integrate all of our data to get near real-time reporting. And those are two numbers that'll be coming into there that aren't reflected yet. But I feel confident that we can keep those, the overall numbers that Gabe's going to show you in a minute, real close to where they're at right now. So.
And then before we talk about those numbers that you just asked about, Mrs. Cooperman, our restricted funds also remain a priority, and that's that growth and development of the capital fund, and the development and fund. And so with that, we've done a little 3-year comparison of our fund balance allocation, and let's see if I can point with my mouse here. Yeah. So here is FY 2017. At that point, our total fund balance was about 5.7 million. Up here, this brown top is the board restricted fund. So as you know, by resolution, the board is restricted $2 million. Meaning we can't touch that unless we come to you and you guys formally allow us to spend those funds. Obviously, we borrow from those funds, in the first part of the fiscal year as we're waiting for tax revenues, but we're not allowed to actually allocate and spend those funds to purchase anything without board authorization. Then we have this kind of, I'm just going to say dark red, which represents the capital fund. And you can see it that year that it's $361,000. And then we have this orange, which is our unrestricted fund balance at that year of $3.4 million. This little gray line here represents the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, recommended fund balance. And that recommended fund balance is based on a few factors. It's based off the operational budget. What is the operational budget of the organization? What are the organization's access to other funds, whether it be, i.e. like our restricted funds, revolving line of credits, things of that nature. What is the volatility of the economic market and the economic conditions that the district operates in, and or I should say the organization, the governmental agency operates within. And so based on our factors, we've got that number at around 16.67%, which is in layman's terms or simple terms, 2 months of expenses. And so you can see it that year, 2017, it was 2.6 million. We had 3.4 in the bank. We're good, right? Well, we're not, because $360,000 isn't gonna purchase one item of our capital plan, let alone fund our entire capital plan. So last year, we spent a lot of time focusing in on developing that capital plan and getting that started. So when we ended last year, we had, still keeping our 2 million restricted. 2.8 million was the initial seed needed to fund our capital plan and have a low enough annual allocation to the capital plan to sustain that capital plan through the 10-year process. And then finally, our unrestricted fund balance now dropped down to 1.8 million, where at that year we should have had about 2.7 million. So we took a hit here, but we did that knowing that the capital plan was extremely important, and if for something happened and we had to burn through that entire 1.8 million, we had additional funds that we could go to the board and ask for if needed. So fast forward to where we're projecting to end this fiscal year, and we're projecting to end with a total of 7.3 million in cash, of which we'll have our, again, board restricted fund. We're proposing allocating 250,000 of that fund balance to our end leave liability fund. Currently, the overall end leave liability is at 1.5 million. But understand, we're never gonna be in a situation where we're gonna have to pay that out all at once. But there are some years in there where we could be paying out a couple $100,000 if we get a lot of people if we get a group of employees retiring that have high balances in their leave funds. And then in this budget that I'm about to show you, we've got another 125 allocated to go to that fund as well. So at the end of next year, that'll be at 375,000. Again, back to the red is that 2.6 million in our capital fund, and that actually follows our capital plan on what that fund balance is going to do. And if you remember, that capital fund balance is going to go up and down as we fund and make purchases. But ultimately, we've evaluated out what that fund balance is based on what the allocations are going to be for that account versus what the expenses are, and we won't run out of money in that account, in that fund.
Are we still shooting for like 1.5 mil out of every budget year?
Yes, we're gonna phase into that. So, I believe next year's another 1.2 million a year, but I'll have to look. It may be 1.3. We'll see it here in a second. I think it's 1.2. Then you have where our unrestricted fund balance is gonna be at the end of this year at 2.4 million, which is just under that mark of the 2.7 million. And mainly because we took the money to fund our end leave. But again, we have that other contingency in place with the board funds.
So, I mean, in a nutshell, when we're sitting here talking about this, you know, the beginning, if you look at that 2017 budget, it didn't accurately reflect the capital. It didn't accurately reflect what we're spending on and leave. So, as we get to this year, you know, we almost meet the GFAO recommendation. We get to where we have that unrestricted fund balance that's going to continue to grow to meet that recommendation, we believe, next year. And we have the capital that, based on our current capital plan, will sustain that plan. And then as we look forward towards getting better information on you know, the building needs for Station 4 and the costs associated with those, then once we're at that unrestricted fund balance at that GFAO recommended threshold, and we have the end liability funded, then we can look at, you know, how that would impact our capital needs as far as, you know, a new station or whatever down the road. And so it just, I don't know, I appreciate how Gabe's work about this, because in my mind, it breaks it out in a way that makes it make sense. So it's not like when people leave and there's an end leave liability that we have to account for, that it seems like it's an unanticipated impact, even though it may have been anticipated as a part of another budget, but it's spelled out in a way that makes it a lot easier to communicate, I think, to the board and also to communicate to the public.
Well, it is an employee as well. I mean,
That's a good point, yeah.
I've been in this industry long enough to know there's a lot of guys and gals that end leave payout is part of their retirement plan, you know, and to have that resting on a annual budget allocation by the board instead of knowing there's actually a fund set aside to fund this after it's something you promised me after a 20-year career.
Right.
I think it's important not only from all the standpoints the chief said, but also from that standpoint and from just good financial management as well. I know it's a lot to absorb, so questions, comments, concerns?
Well, I'm just really pleased that you've taken on the end of liability fund and that we are starting to have a fund, because it has been a worrisome expense that can be quite large.
Yes.
Some years.
Right.
Some years, and just to know it's there, is really excellent. It's really good fiscal management. Are you saying you're going to be funding it at $125,000 every year, or is that just next year?
That's just next year. We're gonna do, there's a lot more analysis that's gonna have to go into when, and we've done a lot of the legwork. We just have to match that legwork up with the budget projections and see where we're at, on how much we actually need to fund it at annually, based on projected retirement dates and balances for
Right,
everybody.
okay.
To see what, just like, it's gonna look a lot like the capital plan does,
Yeah.
where, you know, you've got our level funding, and you've got the monies going in and out, but just, again, making sure that there's adequate balance in there.
Okay.
All right, so what does it all mean?
Huh.
So here's our projected budget. So here's kind of a comparison chart of, right now on the far left column has, you know, kind of some titles, but you have what our approved budget is for this current fiscal year that we're operating in. And then the next column's our draft budget. So we have our net assessed valuation that we received from the counties. We went up 3.72% overall, which is to 588 million. I will say we were projecting about 5% based on the rounds analysis, so we actually didn't come in as high as we were hoping. But because of what happened on the expense side, we've got right there in a projected mill rate of $2.50. I'm gonna actually have to go all the way down to the fourth decimal. We had $2.5040 in there right now is what we're projecting. After we adopted the 18-19 budget, we had 2.5042. So we actually beat our projection by two thousandths of a percentage point.
This is
So I'll
good.
take that all day long.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Tens, hundreds, thousands, yeah, 10,000, yeah, thanks, buddy. Good numbers, so that equates to a property tax of 14.7 million. I do have an estimated 3% increase in FDAT. By May, by the time we go for tentative adoption, I hope to have what that actual FDAT number is. The county treasurers have agreed to estimate those numbers for us once they get some budget numbers in. Our non-levy revenues, small increase, about 2.4 million. May see some other changes in there, but nothing really extensive that's gonna move the needle either direction. You could see we still are gonna utilize some of the carryover or reserve offsets, and that was what we planned. We planned on using 400,000 this year instead of 450, and we dropped it down to 350. And then next year, you can see our projection is to completely be off of that, planning on having carryovers to fund the budget. Wages and benefits, like I talked about, that roughly 3% increase overall at 13.3 million. Our operating expenses of 2.8, so you can see that's actually a decrease over last year. And as I said, I think that's really, I hope it's because the program managers trust us a little bit on this. I know, I think it was Buzz that said in the meeting, well, that sounds all great in theory, I'd like to see it. Our debt service, based on our amortization schedules, and then you'll see 1.2 million go into the capital fund. And that 125 allocation on the end leave is in the wage and benefit section of the budget. So as you can see at the bottom there, overall change of 1.59%. Yes?
It looks beautiful. The 1.59% is wonderful. But about the 4.67 for the following year, I'm trying to see where that comes from.
What? Because I'm still basing. I haven't updated our projections. Our growth rate on our expenses. I haven't updated those projections for growth rate of expenses. We'll look at that a little bit more and may adjust that some. But for now, I kind of want to have it in there a little bit higher, because at the same time, we've also got the tax rate going in higher, and I want to kind of evaluate that. I may lower our assumption too on our property tax growth to maybe 4.5% next year instead of the 5.5, because we didn't meet the mark on the rounds numbers this year, and I'm a little apprehensive about going forward with assuming we're gonna meet that mark again next year, when we didn't meet it the first year. So, but what it does at least give you, Mr. Cooperman, is, kind of that worst case, you can see we go up to the 256 mark. I mean, barring any other, major legislative changes or, PSPRS changes that impact us greatly, so.
So you're saying, Gabe, that there's some likelihood that that number will come down,
Right,
the
yes,
size of the budget in 2 years?
yes,
Okay.
yes. We didn't save a bunch of money this year to go spend it all next year, but.
Question. So, in consumer thought, you have a house worth $500,000 and it did go up in value, but the net effect of this projection is that your property taxes for the fire district would be about the same dollars.
2 years.
Is that what I'm hearing, or is that, how's this
Yeah,
interpret?
because, so, let's take a $500,000 home, let's say, today today there's a home worth $500,000, and we're taxing them at $2.53, so 25370. Every board asks this, and I never put it in my report, and I should have. So that taxpayer's paying $1,200, right? $1,268 right now for taxes, okay? So they see that $500,000 home, okay, go up 3.72%, all right? So that's times 0.0372, that's $18,000. So now their $500,000 home is worth $518,000, okay? So now their tax could be taxed at $2.50 times 2.540, their tax went from $1,280 to $1,317. So it did see a slight increase, but it didn't see the full 3% that the assessed value went up because we did lower that rate.
And we want to make sure when we're talking about $500,000 home, that
That's-
we're talking about the way the county perceives the value of that home, that's more than likely a home in the $700,000 to $800,000.
Exactly, that's
Retail.
500,000
That's really
assessed
important.
value, not market value.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want people who have a home worth $500,000 right now feel they're going to pay that much in taxes.
Correct, and that's a very good point, is understanding that when we're talking about taxes, we're talking about their limited property value, which is a factor of their assessed value, but not their full cash value or even market value, which is
Higher,
always better, yeah.
1.20.
So,
Thanks.
did that answer your question?
It did, and that still leaves 1.2 million, was it, that goes into the capital fund.
Correct.
I mean, so you're still saving for future projects, but keeping people's taxes relatively stable.
Correct.
Thank you.
And just a side note, there's a lot of construction going on this past year, so we're going to see quite a nice hike in taxes, because what you see in land, let's say a land is worth $100,000. In the next year, it's going to be, let's say, $500,000 or $600,000, depending on the build. But there's a lot of new builds going on, so that's going to bring it up. So perhaps we can keep our levy the same or even drop it a little bit next year. So,
Which would be great.
yeah.
Gabe, on your previous screen, or maybe even two, you had that line that dissects or bisects everything, kind of like as a recommended level.
Correct.
Where does this budget bring, what does it look like for this new incoming budget that we're talking about? Is it going to bring that orange more closer to that center line?
Yeah, that'll build that. I mean, so one thing that'll happen is obviously the recommended fund balance will grow because our budget grew. But it'll bring all those, continue to bring that orange line, that unrestricted, up to where it meets, gets closer to the recommended balance, as well as obviously still maintaining our capital plan
Sure.
as it stands. It'll grow the end leave liability fund by 125, and then our board restricted will stay flat.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? That's all I have for today.
Thank
Well,
you.
Well, thank you very much, and
Good
also,
work.
Chief, thank the staff for all the work they've been putting in on this. I know it's a lot of work, and with the understanding that there is light at the end of the tunnel with the way we're doing things, and it's obvious, it's showing, and so, again, thank them all for us.
Yeah, I certainly will, because as y'all are aware, I've been gone the last 2 weeks, and everybody just plugged away and did their part and provide an excellent product. So, yeah, I'll make sure and pass that on.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I recall on our last meeting, we were asked about our opinion about the COLA.
Yes.
And is that something you, and we weighed in that we wanted to see the full budget before we fully authorized it, but is that something you want from us now, or will that be next month?
Well, I guess, what I would ask today, always from the board, I mean, because as the COLA is a board discretionary item here, would be, if anybody didn't like something they saw, please tell us. And obviously, I think the board's been very vocal on what they do like, but I think it is also important that we know if there's things the board didn't like, and if that is one of those components, that we know today versus coming down to final budget. And we could always, you know, we could always do what we did, last year, is have scenario A, B, and C come next month, where you guys adopt scenario A, scenario B, or scenario C based on that COLA piece as a component.
Well, gosh, seeing these numbers that you've just given us, and really the minimal amount of budget increase compared to other times, I certainly can say I'm in favor of the COLA as currently projected.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about with Melissa when she was here, is that
Yeah.
we were shooting for that, what the number was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, great. Well, thank you very much again,
Thank you.
Gabe, for all your work. As we move forward here, into our regular meeting, our first point of business is a public forum. Do we have any speakers members of the public wishing to speak?
We have none.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on. Next item on the agenda, we've already did the Cottonwood Public Safety. Our consent agenda is next up. We have 3 items on the consent agenda. We have the regular meeting minutes from March meeting. We have an appointment of Jimmy Batiste as a member of the SFD Fire Code Board of Appeals, and we have a cooperative Greater Flagstaff Area Fire Agencies All-Risk Emergency Intergovernmental Agency Agreement. I would like to pull items number 2 and 3 from the consent agenda. The reason being, I'd kind of like to know a little bit more about Jimmy Batiste, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And also, I'd like to, not only myself, a little bit more about this agreement with Flagstaff as well, as I'm sure the public would like to know. So with that said, and if there is no other comment on that, on the consent agenda, a motion to approve item number 1 at this time. Do I have a motion to approve on the consent agenda item number 1?
Motion to approve.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so with that said, the meetings are approved. The following item is the appointment of Jimmy Batiste. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Okay, if you'd like to elaborate on that, Chief? Or?
Yeah, Mr. Soto, I'd like to actually have John, he's been doing the heavy lift on this. I'll let him explain it.
So some time ago, the board approved a fire code board of appeals in case somebody doesn't like a decision that we make, that we can refer them to the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals is made up of 3 members. We have a code official, the building official from the city sits on our Board of Appeals. We also have a general contractor, Dave Bierman, who sits on the Board of Appeals. And we had a fire engineering contractor, somebody that was involved in the trades, sprinklers, alarms, those types of things, who was Chris Cotter. Chris unfortunately passed away very suddenly about 6 weeks ago. He was a semi-retired alarm. He had an alarm company. Still did a little bit of work just to keep himself busy, but yes, he sadly passed away very suddenly. So that left the opening on the Board of Appeals. Jimmy Batiste is a fire sprinkler installer in the area. He works for AZ Fire Sprinklers. He's very knowledgeable. He would be a great fit on our Board of Appeals, and that's why I have recommended him to fill the vacancy left by Chris.
And I could assume he is aware of this recommendation.
He is aware of the recommendation. I gave him ample opportunities to back out, and he
Okay.
said that he would be happy to help us out.
Okay, and the other two members know of him also and are,
We have not had our annual meeting. We were supposed to do that last month, but I figured until we have a new member, we would just postpone that. So they do know that there's an opening. I don't know that they know that Jimmy has been recommended to fill that opening.
okay. So with that said, it looks as though a motion is required to have him become a member of the board. Is that correct?
Yes, the process that you approved originally calls for that when there is any opening, I need to bring it to the board for your approval to either reappoint someone or fill a vacancy on the board.
Okay, so with that said,
Can I ask a quick question?
sure.
In regards to Dave Bierman, so did you choose Dave Bierman because he's an upstanding member, of the contractors in the Sedona Verde Valley, or how? Because I wasn't involved in any of
Well,
that.
yes, like I said, the process spells out that we want somebody that's involved in a code official of some sort, which is why we ended up with the city's building official. It also says that we want a general contractor, somebody that is familiar with the construction, maybe not, they're not certainly an expert in the fire code, but they understand how the codes are applied and has an understanding of that. And then again, somebody in the trades, alarms, sprinklers, those sorts of things, for the same reason as a general contractor.
Okay.
The reason that Rick, my fire inspector, and we talked about this when we first were nominating or coming up with names to be on the board. The thing that we liked about Dave was that he always challenges us. He always, when we say, hey, we got to do this, he always wants to know why. He doesn't just accept, oh, okay. It's nice to, he makes us think. So that's why we asked Dave to be on the board. He did not strike us as somebody that's just going to say, oh yeah, you guys are always right. He questions, how did you get to this?
Yeah.
How did you get to this answer?
Right.
So it's good to have to justify your decisions. I
Yeah.
think.
No, I agree. I've known him for a long time. So I was wondering, how long is the appointment for?
They rotate. When we initially did this, one was a 2-year, one was a 3-year, and one was a 4-year appointment. I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe Chris's was the 2-year appointment, so he would have had one more year
Okay.
before his appointment was up.
Okay, so he's basically coming in for a 1-year term, essentially.
Correct, and
Okay.
then next year we'll probably be back to say if he wants to do it again,
Sure.
if we can appoint him for a 4-year term.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Thank you.
John, through this process, through this appeals process, do you lose the ability to enforce any code?
No, essentially what happens is if somebody says, hey, you told me I have to put in a fire exit, I don't like your answer, we say there is an appeals process. You can take it to our Board of Appeals. They have to file a written request. We go in front of the Board of Appeals and we say, hey, this is the rationale I used out of the fire code. This is why I said they need that fire exit. And the Board of Appeals, their job isn't to split the baby and say, well, you're kind of right and you're kind of wrong. Their job is to look at the code and say, yes, you've either made a correct decision or no, you have not made a correct decision. And if they side with me and say, he's right, the fire code says right here, you've got to put that exit in, they may not like that. And I guess at that point in time, they could always come to the board and say, hey, we think your Board of Appeals is crazy. We think your fire marshal is crazy. And they could put it on you. But at least this kind of gives them some sort of body that isn't, like I said, we've chosen people that I think are fair, and they want to know why, how did you arrive at this?
Right.
And so that they will ask the right questions and hopefully help people understand, or help me understand why I made the wrong decision, or help people understand why I arrived at the decision that I did make. But there is no loss of being able to enforce any codes.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other further questions? Okay, with that said, I'd need a motion for inclusion of Jimmy Batiste. Anyone
Okay.
like to make the motion?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, I move to appoint Jimmy Batiste to the Sedona Fire District Fire Code Board of Appeals.
Okay, and do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any further discussion on the matter? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, well, let us show that Jimmy Batiste is a new member of the Board of Appeals for the Fire Code. Thank you. Okay, the next item of the original consent agenda was the cooperative Greater Flagstaff Area Fire Agency's All-Risk Emergency Intergovernmental Agreement. And I asked that this be pulled because I wanted to know a little bit more about it. Come to find out, there were some changes that were proposed that were not done. And we have basically the same document as we did 5 years ago. And none of those changes, for better or for worse, were ever done. So fill us in, Chief.
Certainly, Mr. So, and members of the board, so that's fundamentally accurate what you just said. There was changes that when our legal looked at it, that proposed that because of the timing and the number of signatories on it 5 years ago when this last made its rounds, that we opted not to require them to be included at that time, and instead just have it signed at that with the expectation that they would be included at the next round, which is now. They're still not there, and we're not able to get a clear understanding of why it is that those weren't included. So what I'd ask is that we just table this until the next board meeting, allow Mr. Whittington to tie in with his counterparts of the city of Flagstaff, find out why what we thought were agreed upon changes weren't included, and then I could better inform the board at the next meeting as to how we recommend we move forward.
Okay, and I would ask that, Mr. Whittington, is that ample enough time for you to pursue that matter until next meeting? Sure. Okay. Board, any other further questions on that? Okay, then I move to table this item for our May meeting.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is that, we all agree on that?
Yes.
The May
Agreed.
meeting? Everybody agree on that?
Agree.
By consensus, we will table it to our May meeting. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is our financial report and updates by Gabe Boldrum.
All right, 1 second, plug in here. There we go. All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I emailed you the financials last night. Yeah. So you have them in your email, and I saw Carrie sent them out in your packet. So with that, for the month of March, our property tax revenue was at $582,000, which is about $11,000 over what our projection was for this time. Our non-levy revenue was at $267,317, which was $64,000 over our projected revenues for this month. Expense side, we did have some, mainly personnel, actually was our only category over budget. And the big reason of that was timing. We had 3 pay periods hit this month, which although we did budget for that, there was a little bit more on the benefit cost side as well as the overtime cost side that kind of threw that variance over. When we get to year to date, you'll see we're much more in line with our budget from a year to date standpoint. As you see, the other remaining items, everything came in under budget for the month of March. Year to date, total revenue at $12.8 million, budgeted of $13 million, so we are under by $146,000, and that's due to timing on property tax collection. So we're actually gonna end the year over budget on revenues, but a little bit of a lag. In fact, this month we even saw it in Maricopa County as well. I'm in Pima County. little bit of lagging on that second half of property taxes, so I'm hoping April's a good month for the tax man. Total expenses, were 11.6 million. We are under budget, year to date on expenses by 497,000. Personnel, is, like I said, over budget, but only by about 91,000. And also included in there is our overtime costs and stuff related to our wildland deployments that has obviously brought in additional revenues for the district this year. Buildings and land, vehicles and equipment, communications and managerial, all are under budget for the fiscal year. And again, this is, reflective of what we're seeing as we go into that budget process and we look at what that growth is on the budget. That there was some contingencies built in, which understandably that's the way everybody was taught to do the budgets. That's where their comfort level was, and so I didn't. We expect to see these variances. If we were in line with budget and I got the budget request that I got, I'd be a little nervous. But we'd already looked back at kind of what the historical spend was and saw that the actual spending wasn't where the budgets were, and that's all kind of coming to fruition. I'm happy to see it. Percentage of budget, we've expended 77%, so we have 23% remaining for the last quarter. Percentage of categories of expenses, personnel the highest at 85%, operations at 9%, and managerial at 6%. And then finally, you kind of see that year-over-year comparative cash position. You'll see we're at 8.1 million compared to 5.7 million last year this time. Some of the things that kind of throw that off is we did have that large PSPRS payout at the beginning of last year. That obviously throws off our cash balance for last year compared to this year. But other than that, again, we will see an increase in our all fund balance, which you did see from the budget workshop, that we will still end the year ultimately up over last year. Unless there's any other questions, I know it's kind of short and brief this month, but we're doing a lot of other things on the finance end, so
Yeah.
had to pick and choose our time allocation. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, that concludes my report.
Okay, any other questions? A motion to approve this month's financials?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of approving the financials for the month of April? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the financials are approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple other things on here. We've got the discussion of possible action revisions to the financial policy.
Yes.
You want to discuss that now?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, board members, as you know, as I've said since the board's engaged in my firm, that the spending authority for the Sedona Fire Chief is well below what it is for his peers, both not only in the fire service, but also in government in general. And so what we've done and what you have before you is a revised financial policy that does two things. One, there were some things in policy that were kind of rather restrictive on the purchasing piece, and so we've kind of cleaned some things up. We allowed verbiage in there where multiple bids weren't required when purchases were made through large purchasing consortiums like the GSA, or another popular one is Houston Galveston. So if a purchasing consortium is being utilized, there's not the requirement for the 3 bids. In addition, we put in just some verbiage on the 3-bid requirement to allow some leadway and some management authority within there. I know some feedback we've gotten from program managers is, Sedona's a small community, and we've got vendors that are kind of refusing to do the work of giving us a bid because they know we're not going with them. They know they're fulfilling we're fulfilling a policy requirement by asking them, and they just aren't responding. And so we've added in some of that ability for those program managers to submit the bids they were able to get and provide documentation of an attempt to get other bids and it being unsuccessful. And then it becomes the discretion of the chief, because again, this is all stuff that's within the chief's recommended purchasing authority. That then that decision to purchase would be there at that level. The other thing, there was some title changes. Carrie and Heidi were so kind to go through the document for me, through the entire policies, and just update those titles. And then in addition, we just made some small verbiage changes based upon the switching from Tyler's purchase order system to Bellwether's purchasing order system. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. So in the bids process, do we have a checks and balances in place so that we know for sure that certain companies won't bid, and we're not lazy ever, but that we don't just say, okay, well, we know they're not going to bid, so can we just require one or two? I just want to know that there's a checks and balances, so we are in line with other districts around the country, not just in our region.
Right, and so there's not, I mean, I don't believe the chief has any intention, nor do I have any intention of actually calling the vendors and saying, hey, you know, one of our firefighters went to get a bid and you refused to give a bid, just making sure that why you don't want to bid. I don't believe that was the intention of the policy or our intention to do so. One thing I do have is there is a checks and balance in place with the fact that the district did hire JVG, and that is we operate with 13 other districts around the state, and so we have a pretty good idea on what pricing is, and we have seen in other districts where pricing comes in way beyond what is the normal pricing, and have brought that to the attention of the district. So there's that component, but not, I think it's more of there's that trust in there of the program managers that
Right.
we've given them the authority to run these divisions and run these programs, and thereby, based on their position, trusting them within a certain dollar amount of spending and doing that spending wisely.
Yeah, I only ask that because I just want to make sure nobody's going to come back and say, hey, why weren't we given an opportunity to bid?
Right,
So,
From the vendor's point of view.
right, from the vendor's
Right.
point of view, right.
right.
Well, and I think what Gabe said pretty much sums it up. It is also, those vendors are able to see, because we post our minutes and everything else, that if they're not being included in something that they would like to be included in, to come forward at that time. There certainly is vendors that are more responsive, and we tend to use them more. Unfortunately, there's even times when, due to, I'm going to see if I can say this right, consanguinity, like we had a vendor that was had consistently provided us with the lowest price, but due to a relationship that spawned with one of our members and ended in marriage, we chose to no longer use them going forward, just to make sure that we're maintaining that transparency. So, that's kind of the way it goes. We do trust those individuals that are managing those budgets, make sure that they're well informed of what the process is expected from them, and then we review the documents that they provide us and stick within the letter of the fiscal responsibilities that Mr. Whittington taught us in our seminar.
So I appreciate that. I just wanted to also make sure that, are we just always going to take the lowest price, or are we going to, I like to know that we're not going low when quality is going to be in question. And I know we don't, but I just wanted to confirm it.
No, we don't always take the lowest price, especially because, I guess it depends on how you look at lowest price. Because if we look at life cycle cost of something and we see, how responsive a vendor is, or what downtime is, and how downtime impacts our ability to provide a service, there's the other factors that come into there. And so we don't always take the lowest price. However, we always have to have a good rationale for not taking the lowest price.
Right, of course, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I like to use the word in these is best value, and that kind of
Right,
covers, that's
right.
kind of that all-encompassing, service, price.
Okay.
Chief, the question I have for you is how would you best allow the board, when we see a purchase order or something to that effect, of which system you're going to use, whether you're going to use the bidding service organization or you decided to go with 3 bids? Is there some nomenclature that should go in there that says, hey, on this purchase we utilize the bidding service company, or no, I went and got 3 bids?
Yeah, that's a good question, because initially when you said that, I was considered, I just looked at the way I do it, and the way I used to do it when I ran the wildland program, which if it was a GSA thing, I would just note on there, this is GSA, guaranteed best national price. And then but I feel like we should have mechanisms in place that prompt the individuals that are doing that to provide that information in a way that provides for some greater clarity for the board. And I would be happy to work with Gabe to see if we can get something on there with this and with Bellwether and Heidi to see what, and she certainly has more knowledge in the way this Bellwether works than I do, but see if there's a way to either have a checkbox that says, hey, this is a competitive bid at a certain threshold, or this is guaranteed best national price. And that's why you only see one. So that way, when you all see it, you can quickly see which course of action was taken to
I think
to
that'd
get
be
there.
helpful for the board as a whole. So I'd appreciate that if you look into that for us. So if it's direction from the board, then that would be it. How can we?
Clear. No, that makes good sense.
Okay, thank you.
Heidi, did I overpromise? Okay, good. All right.
And also, Gabe, I see in here that the new levels of authorization is in the document.
Correct.
And it does up the chief's authority substantially and well within, I think, of that position.
Correct.
And that puts it more in line with the rest of the state? Okay,
And I think it's important to note is that authority is not to go out and do whatever the chief
True.
wants.
right,
It's the authority to make purchases within the approved budget.
exactly,
So.
yeah.
When, Gabe, when you first spoke to the board about making that specific change of the chief's purchasing authority, at that time, you thought 25,000 might be more appropriate for this community. But I notice it's 50,000 now. Did your thinking change?
It did. We kind of evaluated how the environment within the community has been over the last couple of months. The systems that are now moving in place in the accounting systems to be able to track and monitor and have good solid checks and balances within there. As well as, again, really looking and taking a moment to look at what his peers or her peers will be at, and realize that, 25,000 doesn't allow the chief to theoretically make the PSPRS payment. And so this, although there's still going to be that board involvement, in the payables process, this allows that chief that authority to make appropriate expenditures within the budget.
And if I might add, I think that is the important part, is that say if I chose to, if the board approved this financial policies it's written, I chose to, authorize a purchase at $449,000. When it comes to the paying process, I should probably make sure that I have done that well, and it's defensible. It falls within a budget, and it's an appropriate purchase, because it's going to come right back in front of you all with the whole, especially in the bill.com, where you can see the whole chain of approvers and everything all the way through to when it comes up to you. And that's going to have to, that approval will have to take place before it can get paid. So it certainly wouldn't be in the chief's best interest to make mistakes on the front end that, when he's held accountable from the back end, can't really explain. So.
Makes sense.
It's a surprise to see that number. I just saw it now.
Yeah.
And I think that given that other districts have this as their regular number, in terms of the bill.com, Chief Coyle, only one of us sees that, because only one of us pays the bills
That's
each
true.
time. So when there's an expenditure like a $49,000, we wouldn't necessarily be aware of it as a board.
You wouldn't be aware of it necessarily at that moment in time, because you're right. You're not seeing, just as if you're coming in signing checks, you are still going to rotate who's signing checks. So there's still going to be purchases that are made that not every single board member is going to see. And I'm sure in your free time you're not perusing through bill.com and looking at the vendor bills. But that's that other check and balance, and other piece is that board report. And in there is a listing of every transaction through all of our accounts. And you can see on the back of that board packet the disbursement schedule. And there's an account on there under the disbursement schedules. It's bill.com clearing. And that's every single transaction that's gone through there. And so you can see those. And then either then go into bill.com and look at what happened there, or pick up the phone and say, Chief, what happened? Or Chief, what's this for? Gabe, what's this for? As we come into the board meeting, asking me what it's for, or Heidi, whoever, and getting that that monitoring, and that's part of that checks and balances, is understanding that it's not always, the checks and balances isn't always at the point of sale, you know, so to speak, it's also on the back end as well.
So you're saying basically that we can ask questions after the fact, after it's been approved and paid?
You can ask me whenever you want.
Well, but what I'm thinking is, you know, prior, when I was on the board from 2004, 2008, we would come in the old-fashioned way, which is my favorite, you know, and look at all the checks and look at all the invoices and be able to ask questions at that time. And I find with Bill.com, I'm having a difficult time, not because I'm not tech savvy, but because when I do, it is my time to sign checks. I'm only able to really see that, and it takes quite a bit of time to, you know, try and find other items that I need to find. I work very diligently in my position here, but I do have, you know, a career as well. I work, and so I would just want to make sure that perhaps in some way it could be made easier so I can fulfill my fiduciary duty to the public, because I feel that's very, very important, and it's a big concern for me.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that questions could be asked at any point in a purchasing process, and as they should be. And I'm always, the board has my contact information.
Right, of course.
I'm always available.
Yeah.
I know Heidi's always available and Chief's always available. So as things come up, I mean, so at one point we may not be available right at that moment,
Right.
but always available at a time to schedule time to go over any of that stuff. And one thing I want to reiterate too is if you're not comfortable with it at that time, don't pay it. I mean, if it gets paid the following week,
Right, of
you know,
course.
it'll.
Yeah, I don't, if
Yeah,
I'm not
so-
comfortable.
Good.
Okay.
I hope that maybe answers some of your questions.
I follow you. I follow you, Joy. So whatever you don't pay, I'll get to look at it.
Nice.
So, okay. Any other questions for Gabe on that, on the revisions? Chief had a. Chief?
No, I just say that it's common, for whatever this is worth, for me and Bill.com, if I see something where there's not adequate detail on a bill, to deny it and then wrote a note back to whomever provided it and say, hey, you know, we break out these costs so I understand what they look like. So, you know, I just encourage you, like what Gabe said, if you see something there and there's not enough information for you to make a good decision, let us know. And it doesn't take very long to plus that back up. So because I certainly want y'all to have confidence in the fact that what you're doing, that you have a clear understanding of what it is, that aligns with the budget, that it's needed, and that, you know, it's an appropriate expense.
Okay, super. Thank you. Any other further input? No? Okay, then I'll need a motion to approve the revisions to Financial Policy 1332, which is the purchasing and purchase order system. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of those changes? Aye. All oppose? Then all the revisions to the financial policy has been approved. The next item on the agenda is discussion possible action for the Stryker ambulance financing options. And Gabe, did you want to review that for us? There wasn't any documentation on our packet about that.
Right, so, the board has already purchased authorized the purchase of the power load gurney and power load system. This is simply the mechanism or means via which we are gonna pay for it. And it's brought forth to the board. Maybe Mr. Whittington, can expand on if we actually need board authorization, given the fact the purchase for the authorization has been made, and this is simply authorizing the essentially operating lease. It will be $1 buyout. The rate is right around 3.1%. And so just looking at our overall financial management of our cash and expenses, and given where rates are at right now, in comparative, we thought it would be a wise idea to make the purchase through the means of the operating purchase offered by Stryker, than cutting the check for the full amount today, or this year. Lease purchase.
So this would be a lease purchase versus an outright purchase?
Correct.
Okay. And it frees up a little bit of cash for us, as opposed to just writing the check. Okay. With that understood, obviously we don't have any figures in front of us as we would have if we had a regular communication. But with that said, this is still something that a motion would be needed or required to approve or deny.
Your authorization, as it stands in the books, contemplates a cash buyout. So if you want to do something different than that, use a finance package, you need to approve.
Okay. Okay, so based on that, then it's the board's recommendation and a motion to acquire the Stryker ambulance through a financing operations as described, as finance has described.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen it either, so I'm shooting from the hip here a little bit.
Yeah.
But I believe what you're contemplating is the motion would authorize financing for the acquisition of the Stryker ambulance equipment by way of lease purchase.
Correct, and I guess my next line would be so moved, that'd be the motion.
What he said.
So I would need a second.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, then that motion is approved. Thank you, Bill, for that. Okay, moving right along. Next item on the agenda are staff items, and I believe it is the monthly fire chief report. Chief Coyle.
Yes, thank you. So on the fire chief's report, a couple things I wanted to touch on at the very beginning of this is that, this last heavy part of last month and then going into this next month, one of us getting around those budget numbers is going to become a big part of everybody's day. So as we do that and as we continue to refine those numbers, if any questions come up from any individual board members that want to point towards me, if there's any concerns that they think about later on from these board meetings, then by all means bring those forward, because we want to make sure that when we come to you next month that we're able to address all of those concerns. So looking at the numbers for March, that 90th percentile, that's one of the first things my eyes jump to, and we're down to 10 minutes and 5 seconds from 10 minutes and 27 seconds the month before. And looking at the number of calls, which is up, I'm glad to see that, that negative correlation, increase in calls and a decrease in response times. So, a lot of that, frankly, has to do with the timing of calls. If we start to get more of those at the same time, or we have to pull people from further out to respond to a given area, that may change. And that one of the things that I did want to bring up about that, because as I list some of these calls that occurred in the last month, is that we're beginning to see what we think at least is kind of a change in the trend, as certain areas where there is not camping allowed within our district, push people towards the few areas where camping is allowed, specifically out towards the, I guess it'd be towards the west there, the west, that way.
Yeah.
That, we've seen what appears to be, again, it's kind of preliminary, but an increase in those backcountry calls for motor vehicle accidents, for people out at unimproved campsites, out of that. So it'll be interesting to see over the coming months if that trend increases. But it does certainly seem to be that boundary between us and the Verde Valley there is an area where we're going to start to see an increased call volume, because it's one of the areas that dispersed camping can take place for a long period of time at some points, seems, judging by some of the camps. Yeah, so some long-term rentals, yeah, of dirt. The incident response by stations, y'all can see all the numbers right there. Again, Station 6 and Station 5 tend to be the slowest. I predict that Station 5 will become close to Station 6 in the next month as their slide rock calls increase and everything kind of moves further up the canyon. And then the incidents by time of day, as of course was reflected there again. What's curious to me as we look at these incidents by time of day is that as they tend to move later towards the evening, and traffic, as I think everybody experienced today on the way in here. I don't know what the new normal is now, because it surprises me on a Tuesday when I think everybody's done with their spring breaks and everything like that. That it's still. It is Easter week. There you go. It's Easter week. So we'll see. Maybe next week, post Easter week, we'll see a little downturn before school's out. Right?
Chief Coyle, before you go on.
Yes, ma'am.
You started by pointing out the 90th percentile and being pleased with that, especially given that we had a lot more calls to attend to. Could you just please tell us what the national recommendations are and how, or what makes you pleased with that? Could you please say more about that
Sure.
90th percentile?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what makes you pleased about it is when we see that we have an increase in the number of calls that we respond to, then what that tells me is that as the number of calls increase, there's a higher likelihood that more than one call will occur in one station's first due at the same time. So say station one, for example, if that station one will have 2 calls that overlap as those numbers go up. So when I see that we have a greater number of calls, but when I see that the 90th percentile for the response time for the time for us to get a unit on scene is going down in that same condition, then that makes you think that the crews and the battalion chiefs are working together in system status. They're watching where the trends are, and they're moving equipment around, getting back in service, picking different routes to get back into the district when they go to a hospital based on where the call volume is and where the heavy traffic is. That they're anticipating to the extent possible those changes, and that they're being active in managing those. Because if you're not active in managing those, I would expect to see that as the number of calls go up, that there'd be a relative increase in the response time. You know,
90th percent.
in the 90th percentile.
And is the 10 minutes and 5, which is really beautiful looking, but is that, what are we aiming for? Given all things
Yeah, that's a
equal,
great question.
What are we aiming for?
So there's, we could find a number to anchor into when it comes to what's increases the likelihood of someone's surviving from cardiac arrest. We could look at numbers that have to do with the fire, with the growth of a fire and going from that incipient phase, a phase where it becomes free burning. But what we were doing that aligns with what the accreditation model is collecting the data, looking at the ways that we can get the most accurate data, and then decide what standard we want to benchmark ourselves against and what we can do to get there. And it sounds almost like I'm being evasive with an answer, which I'm certainly not. But the risk of taking an arbitrary number, like we said, if we said 6 minutes, if we said we want to be there, said 6 minutes,
Right.
that doesn't really take into account the reality of our turkey foot road system, where you can't get people across to fill in behind them when we do get busy in certain areas. So right now, what I'd like to see is consistency in the out the door times from station or from shift to shift at a given station. So that means that where a station's configured a certain way that has its limitations or its benefits to the proximity of the bedrooms to the bays, all the different things, the number of flights of stairs people have to go down. And when you look across it from shift to shift, you would expect to see those response times very close to the same. And if you see that close to the same, and then you see the overall average from station to station, they're the same. And then you see the overall shift cumulative totals to cumulative totals, that 90th percentile the same, then I think that to me that says that, hey, within the ability within what the firefighters and the crews have the ability to manage, they are being effective in getting out the door quickly. They're being effective at routing to it. And then when I look at these times, if all of a sudden these trends start to go up and it correlates with the call volume, or you get to a point where maybe when you get, say we got 390 calls one month, and all of a sudden there's a big bump, I'm like, wow, are we at that point now where that overlap, because 390 calls probably correlates to more traffic, to a bunch of other things that we don't maybe know about right now, that we need to look at other possible causes of that impact and determine which one of those we're able to address, and then move to address them. So to me, it's not just a number. It's looking at how those numbers, the relationship there and between those numbers and what's occurring, to see that we're just being active in managing that to the best way possible. But because I don't like leaving a half-answered question, if I had to say what would be a goal of mine, it would be that we could get there within 8 minutes. And I don't know if that's possible, frankly.
In this
Yeah, given all the constraints that exist. But
Well, it is beautiful to see, that kind of number with the higher volume, and I appreciate your more in-depth explanation.
yeah, hopefully that made sense.
It does.
Okay,
it does,
good.
Yes.
All right, so Carrie, I wouldn't talk very much, so I'm trying to do my best. So the CRM update, I'll let John provide that.
We did have a few structure fires. Luckily, they were relatively minor. We had someone using a torch improperly. We did have an electrical or a kitchen fire at Whole Foods that could have been fairly serious. An employee with a fire extinguisher who was trained in how to use it saved the day. That's always nice to see. And then we had a dryer fire on Tortilla Drive right over here, which I'm going to touch on in my safety message. Prevention activities, fire inspections, plans reviews, car seats and all that. We did about 357 activities last month, so it was a fairly busy month for us.
Thanks, John.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So in regard to the electrical fire at Whole Foods, is there a follow-up with them that you would go in and check why there was an overload and if we can?
Yes, they actually had an electrician coming in to deal with the issue. They had multiple rice steamers plugged into one outlet, and so it was drawing far too many amps. So they were immediately going to have an electrician come in. In fact, they were on the phone with him.
So
when
we're
I
going to
left.
follow up with that after the electrician does his work?
Yes, we follow up with fire inspections and all that on a regular basis, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yesterday, I had the pleasure of following Rick around. The Crestview Community Church requested a fire inspection, and your inspector arrived on time. I mean, he was exactly on time. And it was a good almost 3-hour inspection of the building inside, the perimeter, and outside. I've got a little bit of a background, and but he was very professional, and I learned a lot just following him around and so on. And with the things that are listed that we need to address in 45 days. Very professional, and I have to laud him for the work that he did for us. And we look forward to making those improvements within the church.
Well, thank you. That's very nice to hear. My fire inspectors are very thorough. They do a great job. I'm so glad to hear that he was on time. We do have a busy schedule. We're not always on time. We try to be every time, but unfortunately, with traffic and the number of fires popping up occasionally, I'm glad that you are so pleased. Thank you.
John, I do have one question for you. On your prevention activities, you're listing 357, and I don't know if that's inspections or hours, but is this program for the field inspectors at the station level? Is there an opportunity to incorporate that into the prevention activities that we can view?
I guess I'm not.
I guess I'm looking to see is I see a number of 357 for prevention activities, and activities could mean a lot of things, but is there a checks to see how many inspections we're doing from the field personnel?
That's a combination of everything: plan reviews, inspections, car seat installations, the whole deal.
Could we, John? Could we break out occupancy inspections that are done by the engine companies and report that number separately?
We can do that. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's
Because I mean it's a huge undertaking. You guys put a lot of time into this, and the fruit of all your efforts is to see what the results are.
Sure.
And as we see a progressive amount through the course of the year, as they maintain or achieve all these inspections, it's they're to be applauded for all the work they're doing. So if we could get a breakdown on that to present to the board so that we can see that they're doing a heck of a job, I'm sure.
Sure.
Okay, super, thank you.
So if it pleases the board, what I'd like to do is just go over some highlights of last month and then let Chief Mazulis talk about the coin that he had the opportunity to present as kind of the closing part of the chief's report. So one of the things that you may have seen on the Facebook is our wildland training. It's that time of year, getting ready for wildland season. Crews throwing shelters. Everybody's already had their pack test, so all that's looking really good. There's been an increase relative to the month before in the number of backcountry motor vehicle accidents. So again, those rental UTVs, not always rental. Sometimes people own them, but
Bicycle.
yeah, bicycles, whatever. Yeah, there's lots of different whatever mode of transportation people tend to. The more people are out there using them, the more people tend to fall off of them and hurt themselves. And one of the other things that occurred this last month was we worked with the Department of Public Safety to help them practice their bucket work to proficiency on the helicopters, which also gives our crews an opportunity to practice their communicating with the helicopters to proficiency, getting to call in those drops when the helicopters are going out. Normally they set up out there by the sewage treatment center, set up a pumpkin, we call it, a large portable water tank, just like we would on a fire. They do their dips out of it to practice their drops, to get the hours they need, and then we communicate with them on those drops to practice our communication. There's also Human Resources has listed the firefighters application on the website and on the Facebook page, so that's open right now. So hopefully we'll get a list of strong and diverse candidates. Crews assisted the veterans with their Vietnam welcome home ride. Took the ladder out here, put it up with a flag on it, and then hung around with those guys. Nice enough, gave me a cool little coin or a button that they got from the gentlemen that were out there doing it. 3 of the board members got to participate in the Arbinger training over the last month, so we're back up to 100% Arbinger compliance across the whole district, which I think is pretty awesome. And then the last thing was the occupancy inspection that we touched on, but I was hoping that Chief Mazulis could provide a little bit of information about the coin that you had the opportunity to deliver. Oh, Ed, sorry, I had one more thing before that, because I don't want to talk after you, because I said you were going to go last. Right before I left on my wonderful little running vacation, I had the opportunity to meet with a young lady named Haley. Her friend set this up as a surprise up in Flagstaff at the Fat Olives. She was a climber that was involved in an accident on the Overlook, and she almost died. She had significant traumatic injuries, and our crews, the crews from Highland and the crews from Guardian and Coconino County Search and Rescue, worked together in a very coordinated, effective way to get her quickly off from the bottom of the escarpment where she lay, up to the short haul attendant, short hauled on the end of the rope, up to another waiting helicopter at the Overlook, and then to FMC, to their trauma center. And she's walking now. She was very emotional. If you look on, I put the video up that that Northern Arizona Healthcare did. It's on our Facebook page, but it was great to have the opportunity to see her there and see somebody that's just so thankful to be alive and so full of life after something that we participated in. It was just really cool. So with that, Chief Mazulis, thank you.
So as you also saw on Facebook, we had the opportunity to present a survivor coin a couple weeks ago, and it was a great opportunity. It was a great thing to be a part of. Both the patient and her husband came by the station, and she had written a prepared statement for the crew that treated her and read it. It was very heartfelt and very personal, and then allowed us to ask some questions, and it was neat for the crew to be able to interact and specifically the medics and the dispatchers that were involved, because the dispatcher, it's hard to describe, but the dispatchers in these situations build a relationship from afar with the caller and who was her husband, who was very obviously emotional. And so it was a neat moment to see them interact and see them meet each other, because their only meeting prior to that was a very frantic phone call. And got some feedback. And then when I felt a level of comfort with the person who we got Rosk with and who was there to receive the coin, I did ask her how long her chest hurt after the incident, and she looked at me and said, "It still does," but I don't care. So it was a neat experience. I hope we have tons of them, and just really good deal all around. So
Thank you.
What was the nature of her medical emergency?
she, well, now that's been on Facebook. She experienced a cardiac arrest.
Oh,
Yeah, and so it was during the parade, and she happens to have a condo on the parade route, and so adding to the complexity, it didn't delay our response. But yeah, she, all intents, had a cardiac arrest, and then her husband, through coaching with the dispatch center, initiated CPR. And what was especially unique to this event is he had a house phone, and he had it on speaker, and he set it down and didn't turn it off, which normally happens with 911. And the dispatcher had the forethought to keep the line open, and so they recorded the coaching. It recorded our crew arriving, and it recorded our crew's initial treatment, which is a proud papa moment for me, because we've been training a lot on what we call pit crew CPR, where you have a very methodical approach to doing CPR. And the guys, I'm like, okay, they're going to say this next, and boom, they'd say it. Okay, they're going to do this next, boom, they do it. And it was kind of neat. And so we got that audio out to the crews to review, and it was pretty good deal. Yeah.
thank you.
Good, super, thank you on that. I didn't get a chance to make it. Was there any other board members there?
There was not, and honestly, not to discount a board member's presence, but it was very organic and very. It was like an aunt you hadn't seen in 30 years, and it was a very humbling experience, and I think it just allowed the crews and the dispatcher I just kind of stood in the corner and just, because I wasn't a part of it, and they just have this bond they built, and I think it was, and it wasn't done at a board meeting like we've done in the past, because once she was discharged, her husband began calling all the agencies he could find in the phone book, and wanting to meet people, and so there wasn't an urgency to it, but he had a want and a need to reach out, and so that's why we facilitated it in this fashion. So, but it was awesome.
Super, well, yeah. Thank the crew for a job well done. Thank you. Okay, Chief, is there anything else on your report?
No, sir.
Okay, well, that brings us up to our next item on the agenda, and that's discussion possible action, a purchase order of 1913 to work of ARC Fabrication. And I think that's Chief Mazulis.
That's me. So if you do or do not know, board and chair, we've got 2 UTV vehicles, utility vehicles in our fleet that we utilize for the backcountry rescue stuff. And when they were purchased and outfitted, the crews that worked to outfit them did so with the best commercially available equipment. And fast forward to some good use in inclement weather, and as our backcountry gets more backcountry, we've recognized that the med set or the med sled that is installed in the bed of the apparatus, while it's efficient, it doesn't provide for good rollover protection for our patients or weather protection. And we've had a few calls where we had quite a bit of snow and exposed people, trying to keep them warm, and then as stated, our backcountry roads are getting busier, and so in order to facilitate a safer patient care environment while transporting these patients, and we reached out to some fabrication shops and had them look at modifying our current apparatus so that the patient will be better protected when transporting. And that's what this purchase order reflects. They did go out and attempt to get multiple bids. There aren't a lot of fabrication shops in the region, and this one we fell upon this shop. They've got a good reputation, and their turnaround time is incredible, so they won't have, if approved, this apparatus out of service for very long. And having a fab shop or a fabrication shop do the work also gets us the opportunity to have somebody that has a little more knowledge about they do a lot of work to different UTV products and such, and they will have to modify some of the stock engineered rollover protection, but with their certifications, it'll ensure we get a product that's safe for our patients and our crew.
How does that relate to the warranties that we have on the vehicles themselves? Does that put more of a liability on us, or what is
That's another part of utilizing a shop. You know, they have their liability insurances as a fabrication facility. You know, versus, for example, our shop. You know, being a welder, or oh, hey, Mr. Soto's a great welder. Let's take it over to his garage and do it. This buys us a recognized shop with recognized welders and liability. And the research we've done, I haven't found anything that.
No, I was just gonna say that we asked Greg Eberline, being that he's a civil engineer and he's used to that stuff. He was the one that took the point on finding shops and talked to him, and it's my understanding from the conversation that I had with Greg prior to leaving that when they checked with Polaris, that the modifications that we intended to do would not have any impact on the warranty.
Okay.
And we go out there to show you, but fundamentally it's just a matter of extending that roll cage out over it so that if the vehicle was to roll over and you had a patient that was in the back, the patient would be afforded the same protection that the occupants inside of it are afforded.
You know, we had the opportunity to be in one of those vehicles for the St.
That's
Paul's
right.
Parade, and Greg Eberline showed us, except for one of our board members who was in a different section of the parade.
Yes, I was.
Yes, but he showed us the issue and how it could be remedied.
Oh, great.
And it was really interesting to see.
And there is, unfortunately, you know, Polaris I forgot what it's called, but they make this really cool vehicle that the military uses to do what we do, but it costs $110,000 for one of them. So, you know, and there's just, when we're chasing after people that are in these vehicles, you know, to go render aid, we have to have something that has comparable clearance, has comparable width, and it leaves us in a position to modify something. But I feel confident that between Chief Mazulis and Greg Eberline that they did adequate, and Mike in the shop did the proper research and landed on a person to do this that will do a good job.
Okay, very good. Well, with that said, is there any other questions for the chief? Then I will need a motion.
I'd like to make the motion.
Okay.
I've got a few years spent in the backcountry, both in the air and on the ground. And I'm honored to move to approve purchase order 1913 to Work of Art Fabrication for the amount of $12,000 utilizing salary savings or unused capital expenditures to supplement fleet budget funds for modification of the UTV fleet as outlined in the quote.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Okay, thank you. Okay, next item up is the discussion update on the fire chief hiring process. And I believe, Chief Coyle, you got it.
It does, and I was going to spend about 30 minutes and build up to a crescendo, but I'm not going to do that. So, yeah. Bill's going to appreciate that. So, yeah. But what I will tell you is that between Heidi's, well, honestly, there's a lot of different people that do it. There's the ones I know about that have been actively working to establish our LinkedIn profile and to make sure that we posted the job announcement to that. Being on Instagram, being on Facebook, and then the work that the BCs have been doing to every day make a post about something that's going on that day, which just brings more people to our page, and when they see the announcement and everything. I think all that collectively, and of course the work that Dr. Davis has done, advertising through all the different entities and actually doing some direct outreach. But as of this morning, we had 36 individuals apply. Yeah, it's good. I know the last numbers is a little scary. We still have about, what do we have, 2 weeks left pretty much? Yeah, 14 days. Of those, 20 were qualified. So, which is kind of normal. Is people apply, and then when you go over every one of their the criteria that we require from them, and then some of those fall off. 16 of it have been put through that initial phone screening process, and 12 of them have passed. So it was our goal to get about 15 at the end of this phone screening process, and so with 2 weeks left and 4 of those 20 applicants yet to be phone screened, we currently have 12. So I'm happy to know that that's where the numbers are. I can tell you that the next week what we'll be working on is identifying the process for those Skype interviews. Dr. Davis and I are working to set up some meetings. So I think that's the 23rd and the 22nd and 23rd of May. So we'll have that process, and then we'll be in a position to provide you all some numbers as far as how many you can expect on June 2nd and 3rd. And Mr. McCarthy, I'll make sure and include you, since you won't be able to be here on the 2nd, in that once we get that Skype information.
I have
together.
to learn how to use Skype first.
Yes, sir. You and I together. We'll figure it out.
Yes, Chief.
So yeah, those are the numbers right now, and continue to move forward. And yeah, I'm glad to see where we're at.
Those are robust numbers.
Really,
Yes,
really
yeah.
happy with those numbers. Really happy.
Here's a side question. Are you going to put Skype on this thing?
We could ask Jeremy. I don't really know. So I say Skype is kind of a generic for video conferencing,
conference, yeah.
but I'm not sure if it's going to be GoToMeeting or
Okay, gotcha.
what it's going to be. But we'll make sure that y'all have the ability to participate, have the appropriate app or whatever on your devices, and that'll be. And next week, once I meet with Dr. Davis, we'll figure out what that is. I think we've been using GoToMeeting. No, we've been using the I can't remember, but we'll make sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chief. Like as was
Yeah,
mentioned
really
here, those are great numbers.
Really
I'm
happy.
pleasantly pleased,
Really.
and we'll just keep moving forward.
Yes,
Hopefully,
sir.
we'll have a mad rush at the end, and the numbers will be even bigger.
That's right.
But with that said, thank you again, and thank Dr. Davis for the work he's put into it that we don't even see.
I certainly will.
Okay. Last but not least is our fire marshal's safety message. John?
Do it. As promised, I wanted to speak to you about dryer safety. Dryers are a leading cause of fires in 1 and 2 family dwellings. It's remarkable to me that we don't have more of them, to be quite honest. People don't always clean the dryer vent, the lint trap. You should do that before every load in the dryer. Another problem is that the lint doesn't always get trapped in the lint trap. Once a year, you should probably pull the front of your dryer off and clean all the lint that accumulates in the bottom of your dryer. I'm sure if you haven't done that, you will be amazed at how much stuff is in there. Another issue with dryers is the vent hose. People buy a 6-foot vent hose and they've got a 3-foot run to their wall, and this vent hose looks like a snake behind the dryer. Shorten that thing up. You want as short and straight of a vent as you can possibly get to decrease all of the air entrapment and resistance to let that warm air out of your dryer. And probably the last hint that I have with dryers, a lot of times people say, oh my gosh, the dryer's on and I've got to run to the store. I'll just go open the door and turn it off because I don't want a dryer fire while I leave. There's only one safe way to turn off a dryer, and it's not by opening the door. They go through a cool down cycle so that all of those clothes in the drum have a chance to cool down and not catch on fire. I'm sure that those of you that have been involved in the fire service have all been on dryer fires where somebody turned it off and all that hot mess
Yeah.
of clothes went right to the bottom and smoldered and started on fire. The only safe way to turn off your dryer is to let it go through the cool down cycle. So if you got to do that, run over there, flip it to the cool down cycle, and let it cool down as it's supposed to. That's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And once again, for everybody's participation this past month and all the work being done, a very heartfelt thank you very much for everything you guys do. And with that said, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah. Don't open the door. Let it cool down. No, yes, you idiot. I knew that.